Hello, all the nerds out there. I hope you all are doing fine and busy with your nerdy stuff, right? But get together, and today we are going to talk about the history of Greek literature or ancient Greek. So, people are totally into ancient Greece these days, right? You see them going to Greece and posting their pictures in Instagram and their social network, and also every year a million folks visit the Parthian and explore the ruins, convinced that this place and its culture have something important to say them. But sometimes it's not quite clear what that something is. So, what can ancient Greece actually do for us? It's a kind of big, somewhat crude but fundamental question, and I know all the nerds out there are excited to explore about it. So here it's coming. So, well, there are five major ideas we can take away from ancient Greece. First of all, let's talk about tragedy, and that tragedy, ancient Greek tragedy, that I have already covered in our previous session, that you can get it. There is a playlist called the drama. There you can find the first lecture, which is about the ancient Greek tragedy. You can go and check it out. So anyway, let's come to the point. Tragedy. So the Greeks believed it was super important for everyone regularly witness these gory stories called tragedy. They even had festival dedicated to them. Can you write in the chat box what that festival is? Okay, so where they'd shut down everything so people could go to watch these plays. So these festival could last a whole week and feature up to 17 plays. Isn't it amazing? So some famous ones were the Oresteia by Aeschylus, where Ajax, and also there is Oedipus the King by Sophocles, and Medea by Euripides. So in these tragedies, you'd see people mess up, make bad decisions, or get involved with the wrong crowd, and the result would be complete disaster. But the Greeks believed that fate or the gods played a big role in all of it. And as we can see in every major Greek playwrights that they have mentioned, Oracle, they mentioned Tiresias, these are actually the figure who tells the fate of the particular character. So they believe that life could be pretty random and that things didn't always work out based on how good or bad someone was. So it was their way of showing that life can be full of unexpected twists and turns. So that was the introduction of the theater. You can just see here all the points over your screen that you can take a screenshot. Otherwise, you will get this in your classroom, especially in the app that we have. But anyway, according to philosopher Aristotle, what he said about the tragedy. He said a tragedy should have a hero who's a decent person, usually from a noble background but prone to make some small mistakes, just like all of us. Then it represents something like we connect with that character, and at first these mistakes may seem not seem like a big deal, but due to a series of unfortunate events which they are not entirely to blame for, these small mistakes leads to a complete catastrophe. And tragedy is all about showcasing how good people can end up in terrible situation. So it's the opposite of what we see in tabloid or on social media, where people rush to judge those who mess up, right? Whatever you post in Instagram, if you get some weird reply or comment, you always defend yourself and talk about. So these all things, it's not like that here. It was in like different kind of thing in the Greek tragedy. So what was it? So it was like complete opposite what we see in these days in social media, right? So where people especially go and rush to judge those who mess up with their post. Anyway, Aristotle believed that it was crucial for people to regularly watch tragic works to counter their natural tendency to judge and moralize. Tragedy is meant to challenge our tendency to make snap judgment. So without the concept of tragedy, life could become a lot more cruel and judgmental than it needs to be. So we should look back at the Greeks and embrace the important idea. That is actually why that you have all these plays to learn from that. So moving on the philosophy, Athens was the birthplace of philosophy and was home to three of the greatest philosophers. Can you write who are they in the chat box quickly or in the comments so I can see how many of you are actually listening? So anyway, I'm getting comments and that's fine. Everybody is saying correctly. But anyway, these three greatest philosophers are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And what united these Greek thinkers was their quest for education, which means happiness or fulfillment. They saw philosophy as an incredible practical subject that could help people navigate the challenges of their life. And the term philosophy itself actually reflects this approach. So in Greek, that philo means love or devotion, and sophia means wisdom. So, philosopher were people who were devoted to wisdom. But what does wisdom mean? It's not just some kind of mysterious concept, because it's being wise means striving to live and die well, to lead the best life possible given the difficult circumstances we face. So, the history of Greek philosophy is a collection of attempts over the century to address the ways in which we can be unwise. So, when we read Plato's Republic, you see Socrates' dialogue, their argument, all about philosophy is there, and you will find so many, meaningful situation there, like what is just and how to be justified. All these things are there, and if you have time, you should definitely read about it. So, for example, Socrates focused on how people often get confused about important idea like courage, justice, or success. And it's the same here also in modern time. People are confused with ideas like courage, justice, and success, right? Even though they frequently talk about these concepts in their own lives, he developed a method now known as the Socratic method, in which you can clarify what you mean by playing devil's advocate with any ideas. So the goal isn't necessarily to change your mind, but to test whether the idea that guide your life are solid. And a few decades later, Aristotle encouraged us to have confidence when asking big questions. He believed that the best questions are the ones that inquire. So, in the comment box, ask me some question that you really want to know, and especially that question should be like real inquiry. So make that. So he asked question like, what is government for? What is the economy for? You can write what is literature for in the chat box. So what's money is for? What's art is for? If he were alive today, he might encourage us to ask this. What's the news media for? Which is completely manipulated these days, right? And what is marriage for? So, by seeking the purpose behind things, we can gain a better understanding of their significance and impact. So, there were also the Stoic philosophers in ancient Greece, and that Stoic was who focused on panic. They observed that panic doesn't just happen when something bad occurs, but when it happens unexpectedly, catching us off guard. So to combat this panic, they suggested that we should get used to the idea of the danger, trouble, and difficulties. And these are likely to happen at any point. So by preparing ourselves mentally, we can better handle challenging situations. So exactly for you all the nerds here, that you all are seeking to succeed in your particular exam, but sometimes there is some fear, there is some trouble and difficulties along the way to clear the exam, right? So by these philosophers, it actually prepare yourself mentally so you guys can handle these challenges, these pressure situation better, because you might get succeed or might 1 or 2 marks behind, and then how you can just mentally prepare for that. So the overall aim of studying Greek philosophy is to observe these, add many other lessons, and apply them in our modern world. It's not just about knowing what each philosopher said, it's about cultivating wisdom, at an individual and societal level starting right now. So it's not like just you just find one quote from Socrates and you post it in Instagram or made a story about it. Actually, you should apply that instead of telling others to follow this. Because what we usually do in all our posters or social media accounts, that we get good quotes and we post it, and we think others to follow these, but we don't apply to ourselves. The first thing you should do when you post any comments, status or a story, you should apply those on yourself first, right? Okay, that's great. Now let's move about the democracy. And these days, democracy's meaning is completely different. And if you're living in some large country, that meaning is completely different these days, right? So Athens at that time was like very famous as the birthplace of democracy. You can say that was our first place where democracy happened, and it was developed in 5th century BC under the leadership of Solon, and another is Cleisthenes and Ephialtes. So I can just put this name in the chat box if you didn't get it. But anyway, however, democracy faced challenges during the later stage of the 5th century BC, when Athens was engaged in a long war with its rival Sparta, known as the Peloponnesian War. Right? To remind the Athenians of the importance of democracy, the great general who was Pericles delivered a powerful speech called the Funeral Oration in 430 BC to honor the war dead. What makes this speech so remarkable is that Pericles isn't just defending democracy as a system of government, he was actually defending what we might call the democratic spirit, which is an ethos of equality, community, and comradeship that arises in societies where individuals see themselves as equal to one another. To act of voting is just one aspect of something much deeper, which we could call fellow feeling, an emotion the Greeks discovered for humanity. Right? So Pericles proudly declared that the Athenian administration prioritized the many over the few, which is why it's called democracy. Their laws ensure equal justice for everyone, regardless of their personal differences. Social standing doesn't determine one's advancement in public life. Reputation, capacity, and merit matter more than social class or wealth. So, against the harshness of the Spartans, Pericles celebrated the generosity, erudition, openness, public speaking, public spiritedness, and dignity of Athenians' democratic life. And these values, he believed, allowed Athens to serve as a beacon of freedom and decency to Greek world, and even to our own time. Now let's talk about its architecture. And the Greeks were absolute master of architecture. They were involved in constructing 5 of the 7 wonders of ancient world: the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, and the statues of Zeus at Olympia, and Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and the Colossus of Rhodes, and the lighthouse of Alexandria. But beyond these grand structure, their ordinary temple were also awe-inspiring. And these magnificent temples, usually made of limestone, and these were scattered all over Greece and its island. Apart from the temples on the Acropolis, there were other remarkable structures like the temple of Apollo at Corinth, the temple of Zeus at Olympia, and the temple of Poseidon to Sonium. And these architecture style of these temple has influenced building design worldwide. And even when there's original religious purpose have faded away, that's because they embody values that will always impress humanity: harmony, dignity, calmness, and reason. The Greeks taught the Western world how to build in a way that externalized the noblest ideas of human being. And if you nerds are into sports, then there is something for you too. And who's also excited about bodybuilding and these things, it was there in Greek as well. So let's talk about sports. So while earlier civilization considered nakedness shamefulness, the Greeks celebrated the naked body of gods and citizens alike. So his culture, like the Jews or Poseidon of Artemision, displayed the power and physical, you know, of nude Greek gods, and the disco bowlers capturing a discus thrower in motion celebrated poise and physical beauty of an athlete with perfectly toned muscles, right? And the Greeks had deep appreciation for physical exercise. They held major national athletic competitions every year, with the most famous being the Olympic Games, dating back to 776 BC and held every 4 years. What set the Greek approach apart was that they didn't want athletes to focus solely on their physical power, but also the idea was that everyone should train both their minds and bodies. So it's noteworthy that Milo of Croton, a renowned wrestler in the 6th century BC, was also associated with the great mathematician Pythagoras. The Greeks believed that a healthy mind could only reside in healthy body. So all the nerds do some exercise every day, because when Pythagoras himself said that, or all the Greeks believed that the healthy mind could only reside in a healthy body. So they believed that exercise instilled discipline in people, enabling them to become diligent and virtuous democratic citizens in Athens, or dedicated and controlled warriors in Sparta. An ancient Greek's gym, let's talk about who's excited about the gyms and all. There was also gyms. So ancient Greek gyms were not like today's. So today is like mindless bodybuilding centers, right? The Greek gym, they served as public spaces for physical training, intellectual exchange. Gymnasia and a school were essentially the same thing. Many of Socrates' dialogue on idea of justice and truth unfold in these gyms. So the Greeks gave us the remarkable and often forgotten idea that our body should be cared for just as much as our mind. So being solely intellectual or focused on physical appearance was considered obscene, and true virtue meant finding a balance between the physical and the mental, right? Because some of us these days are into reading and all the intellectual stuff, but we don't care about our physical body, and some of us are completely focused on building our physics and bodies and all, but we don't think about intellectual things, so or mental order of our mind. So when you do the workout, when you move, you see even in ancient time that these philosophers and everybody, all the Greeks, realized that how important is this exercise or healthy body to for a healthy mind. So today everybody should hear, at least go in the evening or in the morning or whenever you get time, do some physical exercise. That will definitely help you to grow. Anyway, sadly, there is a mortal tale about the decline of ancient Greek civilization. Despite having better ideas than their enemies, they lacked organization and were eventually defeated. As a result, their ideas were lost for centuries. The Greek city-state fought amongst themselves endlessly and eventually lost their independence under Alexander the Great. Nevertheless, the enduring relevance of the best Greek ideas deserves our gratitude. We should respect that as we wander among the ruins of these places that we go and visit. So when you have these trips, you think of how great they were. So let us remember the role of tragedy, emphasize the practice of philosophy, honor the spirit of democracy, build with harmony and dignity, and exercise both our minds and bodies. And this is all thanks to the Greeks. We have timeless wisdom to guide us in our modern world, and you have the upper hand that you will succeed. Let's start with archaic period. And what is the archaic period? Back in the day, during festivals, no, poets would perform their works orally because that was the tradition. And in the dark ages of Greece, there was this epic called the Iliad by Homer. It talked about how, about the final days of Trojan War, which was sparked by a lady named Helen, right? And every Greek kid grew up hearing stories about heroes like Achilles, heroine like Helen, and we have more heroes there like Hector, Paris, and through these epic and the poem explored the differences between gods and humans and the chaos of war versus the peace. And the fun fact is, Alexander the Great believed he was related to Achilles and even slept with a copy of the book under his pillow. And Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are like the greats of Greek literature, and no one really knows exactly when they were written, but it was probably around 800 BC or later. Another important poet from that days was Hesiod. He wrote two surviving works, are like Works and Days and Theogony. So remember that. And now let's move to the classical period. And what happened there? The classical period was a time when all sorts of literary genres started popping up. They had lyrical poetry, odes, pastorals, elegy, epigrams, and plays of comedy and tragedy. They were also philosophical and rhetoric writing during this period. We have Sappho and Pindar, and they were like the last two badass lyrical poets. And out of the hundreds of plays written back then, only a few survived, like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were the playwright of the time. And they also had comedies which were all about making fun of the stuff, and Aristophanes wrote some hilarious play that we can still enjoy today. And on that Aristophanes we have already made one video. In fact, all the Greek playwrights we have created a different videos separately, so you can just go and watch all these. Again, this was all about classical period. Then we have that Hellenistic period, which occurs between 323 BC to 31 BC, almost 300 years. And this period started when Philip II of Macedon conquered a bunch of Greek cities around 338 BC, and his son Alexander the Great took over and expanded the empire even more. The Hellenistic age refers to the time between Alexander's death and when the Romans came into power. And by the end of 3rd century BC, Alexandria in Egypt became the center of Greek culture. And during this period, Greek poetry was on fire. Theocrates, we have Callimachus, and Apollonius of Rhodes were some of the big names at that time. Theocritus was the pioneer of pastoral poetry, which the Roman dude Virgil later mastered. So Menander was a famous playwright, especially in the genre of new comedy. And don't forget the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which were a huge deal during that time. And they finished that work up in Alexandria in the 2nd century BC. And at the end, we have the Byzantium literature. And this literature refers to the literature written during the Byzantium period, which followed the ancient Greek literature. It was all about combining Greek and Christian tradition with Roman political system. And the writing style during this time was mainly influenced by the Near East, and they had a mix of Greek, Christian, Roman, and Oriental elements. Besides personal letters, the most popular writing style was called Atticizing, and there were also some early works in Latin and French from the Latin Empire. So this period was known for its historical chronicles and encyclopedias. One cool thing that have survived from Byzantium Empire is the epic poem called Diogenes Acritas, and it's considered a precursor to modern Greek literature and is the most famous acritic song. So that was all about introduction to Greek history. So after Alexander the Great died, the Romans got all into Greek arts and literature, and the Hellenistic culture spread all over the Mediterranean. And the ancient Greek literature, starting from Homer and Hesiod to Sophocles and Aristophanes, had a huge influence on Roman surgeons and authors. Plato, Aristotle, Herodotus, and Thucydides were all parts of this literary legacy. And the poetry and prose shaped Europe for centuries. So, in the words of Edith Hamilton, who wrote about Greek literature, says, and I quote here, "You could quote all the Greek poems, even the tragedy, and every single one of them would show the fire of life burning bright." Every Greek poet warmed their hands at that flame. So guys, that's all in this video. We talked about the history of Greek literature, and also we had the introduction. We talked about all the period here, and that's all today. And remember to subscribe the channel and also hit that like button. But one more thing, you should also leave one comment, and don't forget that it's continue class, and I'll see you tomorrow with couple of more lectures. Especially we'll move to Homer's Iliad and the summary of Odyssey. We'll also talk about Hesiod, and then we'll have Pindar, then Socrates and Plato. Well, quite a lot of things are coming on your way. Just subscribe and hit that bell icon as well. Thank you so much, and bye bye. Have a great day ahead.